Thank you all so much on top of anonymous supporters. But without further ado, I'm going to bring in Drew Silva here. Drew, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, man. Thanks for inviting me.
There you are.
This is new for me, but
there's some odd delay going on right now. I think it's because you have two different streams. So hold on, I can actually add you there. Is that better?
Let me see. Yeah, that's not really the one I wanted to.
Yeah, there's a little bit of an audio delay right now. I can hear. I'll bring in the other one then. But anyway, so for Drew Silva, if you guys don't know Drew Silva is a writer over at Roto World as well as a host on the Roto World Baseball podcast, where they recently interviewed Jared Diamond about his new book and much, much more. You can find Drew on Twitter at Drew Silv. That is Drew Silv. Drew, you've been part of the PitchCon Experts mock drafts in the past, and you've been really kind to extend a hand to us to help out with some of your mock drafts. Has been really fun partaking in those. So really, thanks for that.
No, I appreciate you guys always being willing to do it. Is my audio better now?
Oh, way better.
Okay, that's good. Right.
So without further ado, man, I'm just going to let you just jump into this. I'm really excited. You actually, I remember when you first mentioned that you want to be part of it, you're like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. So I've been waiting for this for a while. I'm excited about it, and I'm just going to let you have the floor.
All right, Nick, I have one question about sharing my PowerPoint. So I
got it for you.
Okay, great. Awesome.
See, there we go.
Nick, you know what you're doing.
Well, I'm just really excited to continue here at PitchCon. So here we go. Without further ado, Drew Silva of Roto World doing the future fantasy standouts of 2025.
Yep, like Nick said, my name is Drew Silva. I'm a senior baseball writer at Roto World, focusing on all things fantasy baseball, and I'm happy to be able to talk some fantasy baseball here at this virtual PitchCon weekend. Thank you to Nick. Thank you to Alex Fast and all the fine people at Pitcher List for putting this together and inviting me to be a small part of it. Watch, donate to Feeding America, all that good stuff. This is a really cool thing. My presentation today is an extension of a series of roundtables we ran at rotoworld.com back in April, in which we asked the Roto World baseball crew to identify which players would be the top performers at each position 5 years from now in terms of standard fantasy scoring. And then we all had like a roundtable discussion on it. It's really kind of a thought experiment, but we all took it seriously, and I found it enjoyable to look ahead, without having very much to look at in the present. Hopefully some of you find it enjoyable too. I have to apologize if my microphone is picking up any ambient sounds from outside. Our air conditioning went out yesterday, and we have to get a whole new unit installed. So it's open windows in the office at the moment, open doors. Looks like it has stopped raining at least. But spring in St. Louis just varies from very hot and humid to rainstorms. It's not a good time. I'm probably sweating, as you can see. But yeah, let's get into it. Oh, that beautiful clip art baseball field background, going all polo grounds in the dimensions. This is the first time I've made a PowerPoint since probably high school or maybe early college. So these probably won't be the most professional looking slides you're gonna see this weekend. But we'll start at catcher. The shallowest position in fantasy baseball, the shallowest position in real life baseball, very top heavy when it comes to fantasy stars or really stars in general. And it's been that way since the early days of rotisserie leagues. It takes a special kind of talent to be able to produce high-level offensive numbers at a position that demands so much mentally and defensively. It's a grind to play the catcher position, and I played it for 4 years of my life, and I think my knees are still yelling at me for it. The consensus number one catcher in standard drafts this spring was JT Realmuto. Hopefully we do get some fantasy drafts again soon, and I'm sure Realmuto will still be the most popular option at the position. But he's 29 years old, and he'll be 34 on opening day in 2025. Yasmani Grandal will be 36. Gary Sanchez will only be 32, but he's already a liability defensively now at age 27, and also has some real durability issues, has a groin thing that keeps popping up, some hamstring issues. So I'd say it's likely that Sanchez doesn't stick behind the plate for the long haul. Anyway, the pick is Adley Rutschman, the number 1 overall selection by the Orioles in the 2019 MLB draft. It's easy to fall in love with prospects in this kind of thought experiment. They haven't let us down yet. You can dream on what a prospect might become without having to consider any evidence of what they have not become, if that makes any sense. But I promise this isn't going to be a presentation where I just give you the top minor leaguer at each position. You could just look up a top 100 prospect ranking and you wouldn't have to look at my face. Maybe that's a preferable route. But yeah, catcher, again, it's unique in that it takes a lot of time to learn all the aspects of the job. Teams are not drafting catchers out of high school or signing them as teenagers from the international market and expecting them to arrive quickly as fully formed major leaguers ready to handle the rigors of the position. There are exceptions, like Joe Mauer comes to mind, drafted out of high school. But you look to Will Smith of the Dodgers, Sean Murphy of the Athletics, Wilson Contreras of the Cubs, all debuted around their mid-20s. And I should say that those 3 were each considerations for me as the top fantasy catcher in 2025. They'll all be around age 29 to 30. Carson Kelly of the Diamondbacks, a similar story, was also a consideration for me here. But yeah, my guess is it's going to be Rutschman. Had astronomical numbers at Oregon State. Batted .408 in 2018, .411 in 2019 before getting drafted. 1327 OPS in his final NCAA season. 17 homers in just over 50 games. Shout out to Baseball Reference for adding college stats, by the way. It makes life easier on all of us scribes. But Rutschman appeared in 20 games with Low A Aberdeen last summer in the New York Penn League. That's where he spent most of his first half season as a professional. Batted .325 there with an .894 OPS. He might have begun this year in Double-A if everything was normal and minor league seasons were happening. I don't think they're going to happen now, sadly. Rutschman's 22 years old. He'll be 27 in 2025. We used to consider age 27 the start of a player's peak in baseball. I think it would now be viewed as more the middle of a player's peak, but with catchers, it's a little different. It takes more time for them to develop, like I talked about, to really become a fully formed catcher. Either way, Rutschman should be there for the Orioles in 2025, fully formed, playing in a great home park for power. Hopefully there's some talent around him if the Orioles tanking operation yields the kind of results that it's supposed to. So Adley Rutschman, top catcher 2025, Will Smith, Sean Murphy, Wilson Contreras, Carson Kelly also considered. Moving on to first base. First base is a tricky one in that some young players who are currently trying to make it defensively at other positions could eventually be moved over there if they're not able to handle a more demanding defensive position. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. comes to mind. He did not show well defensively as a rookie third baseman last year in Toronto. Gary Sanchez, who I just mentioned in the catcher discussion, could be a first baseman in the future. Guys like Keston Hiura, Rafael Devers, Yordan Alvarez, maybe even Christian Yelich. Not a tremendous defender in the outfield, even though he has the speed to have the range. I went with Cody Bellinger at first base, who actually should be athletic enough to play the outfield well into his late 20s, early 30s. Again, first base is more of a guessing game in that regard than some other positions. Bellinger is eligible at first base now in 2020, and I expect him to still have that eligibility in 2025, even if it's not his primary position. He is currently scheduled to become a free agent in 2024, which is another wrinkle to this experiment, not knowing what teams these players will be suiting up for, 5 years from now. But you look at the numbers with Bellinger, last year's National League MVP in his age 23 season, 305 batting average, 1035 OPS, 47 home runs, 115 RBIs, also gave you 15 stolen bases and 121 runs scored as the cleanup man in a deep Dodgers lineup. 2025 will technically be his age 28 season, has a July birthday, so 28 to 29. I think he'll still be running a bit, stealing bases a bit, has that really good sprint speed, maybe around 10 to 15 a year like he's been doing in his first 3 years as a major leaguer. I think the power will definitely be there. 90th percentile in barrel percentage last year per StatCast, 99th percentile in expected slugging percentage. He has that natural fly ball generating swing that produced an average launch angle of 17.6 last season. You compare that to the average MLB launch angle of 11.2. Bellinger's the real deal. He might even fill out a bit more, I think, in terms of muscle mass, especially if he's moved to first base full-time at some point or the corner outfield. Pete Alonso is probably my second choice here. Set a rookie record for home runs last season with 53, but he's older than Bellinger, and I don't know that Alonso will ever be a great source of batting average, which is something you have to consider when you're talking fantasy numbers. Matt Olson, I liked, probably my third choice. And there's like Josh Bell, Miguel Sano, who quietly had a career year last year, even though he missed a bunch of time again due to injuries. Maybe a 35-year-old Freddie Freeman is still getting the job done. I can envision that. Rhys Hoskins, had we done this a year ago, he would have felt much more worthy of a mention. And I think you have to be careful about some recency bias with this. Like, a guy has a bad year and you just write him off, like similar to the Vlad Jr. conversation. But the pick is in at first base, Cody Bellinger. I think he'll be the guy there, the top option at first base in 2025. Now to second base. There was a lot of variance across the fantasy baseball industry when it came to ranking second baseman for the 2020 season. You look at the average draft positions of the second base eligible players. Gleyber Torres, 25 on Yahoo, 28 at NFBC, 33 at ESPN. These are ADPs. Jose Altuve, like almost the same, 28 on ESPN, 31 on Yahoo, 33 on NFBC. Those were the top two guys, but there wasn't much of a gap among the top several options at second base. Ketel Marte was/is up in that mix too. Whit Merrifield, Keston Hiura, all with top 50 average draft positions. And so was this guy. Ozzie Albies, my pick for the top second baseman in 2025. I'm totally stealing this note from Matthew Pouliot, my colleague at Roto World, who does all of our projections and is in the Fantasy Sports Writers Hall of Fame, so a good guy to steal from. But the last 10 players to collect 50 home runs and 400 hits through age 22, it goes Ken Griffey Jr., Alex Rodriguez, Andrew Jones, Adrian Beltre, Miguel Cabrera, Justin Upton, Mike Trout, Manny Machado, Bryce Harper, and then Ozzie Albies. So pretty good company for Albies to be in there with the hits and homers. Albies last year batted .295 with an .852 OPS, 24 home runs, 15 stolen bases. He got to 102 runs scored despite spending a good part of the season batting in the lower half of the Braves lineup. By the end of the year, he was established as the number 2 hitter at Atlanta. I think he'll be there for the long haul. He's age 23, could get some looks at leadoff too. I think the overall batting line will continue to improve. I think he can do better than an .852 OPS. And the counting stats, which are the things that are relevant to fantasy, I think they'll just rise along with that. It just makes sense. Both he and Ronald Acuna Jr. are locked in with the Braves on very team-friendly long-term deals. Should be a dynamic duo at the top of that lineup for many years to come. Gleyber Torres was definitely a consideration here, especially if he remains with the Yankees in that park with a big budget supporting cast around him. Keston Hiura, if he's able to stick at second base for the Brewers, he can rake, definitely a hitter, and has some speed. Gavin Lux, Cavan Biggio, Gavin and Cavan. Don't sleep on Brendan Rodgers of the Rockies either. He's had some injury setbacks recently, but will still be under control of the Rockies come 2025. You're always thinking about Coors Field and how to get a piece of it when we're talking fantasy, especially if you're looking ahead 5 years and you think Nolan Arenado might be out of the picture. Some of their older players, Charlie Blackmon, probably won't be in the picture anymore. So you think about the new crop of hitters that are going to be able to take advantage of the thin air and the hitter-friendly dimensions and the large surface areas that Coors Field provides. Moving over to the hot corner, third base. Speaking of Nolan Arenado, I just have to say from the jump that it felt really wrong to leave him out of the mix here. It's a perennial, top 10 pick, such a reliable source of power for so long. And, might go down as one of the top third basemen of all time, but he just turned 29 years old in April, and it sounds like he's itching to get out of Colorado. Doesn't like what's happening around him there. So you can't count on the Coors Field effect still being there for Arenado. I went with Rafael Devers. Big breakout year for Devers last season. 311 batting average, 916 OPS, 32 home runs, 54 doubles. Led all major leaguers in total bases, 115 RBIs, 129 runs scored. Just an absolute fantasy monster, especially with where he was being drafted. And he played good enough defense at third base to finish 12th among all position players in Fangraph's version of wins above replacement. Maybe that alleviates some of the concerns that Devers will eventually have to move to first base or even DH. Devers ranked in the 91st percentile in hard hit rate last year, according to StatCast, 94th percentile in exit velocity, cut down on the strikeout rate big time. The analytics back up the breakout, the traditional baseball card numbers, fantasy, 5x5 scoring. It's all there. 23 years old, has the youth, doesn't turn 24 until late this October. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who probably would have been my pick here a year ago, was in the 46th percentile in hard hit rate as a rookie, 58th percentile in exit velocity. The overall offensive production from him was underwhelming, and his play on defense was a mess. But he's just 21 years old, and it would be shocking to me if he doesn't become one of the game's premier sluggers at some point. It might have to happen with him playing first base or being the Blue Jays like long-term DH. Alex Bregman, certainly worth a nod here, given his current career trajectory, just arrow going straight up with all of his numbers. But he'll probably be past his prime in 2025 at age 31. Yoan Moncada had a great showing in 2019 with the White Sox, a big breakout for him. He'll be 30 years old in 2025. Jose Ramirez, worth a mention, but he'll be 32. I think those guys will all still be productive, but you worry about them hitting all 5 categories, which is what you want from a top player at any position. Devers, more of a 4-category guy, but I see him being elite in all of those categories. Some names to think about. Some other names to think about would be shortstops, like big body shortstops who could eventually make the move over to third base. Trevor Story, Carlos Correa, Corey Seager, Paul DeYoung, maybe, if he keeps hitting homers. Xander Bogaerts, which would actually complicate my pick of Devers here. So let's move on, get into shortstop. There's a bit of an overlap in the names I've mentioned at different positions. I'm sure you've picked up on that, but here's a guy we haven't talked about yet. Fernando Tatis Jr., my pick for the top fantasy shortstop in 2025. There's been a revolution, an evolution at this position since I began writing about fantasy baseball professionally in 2008. So this would be my 12th season at Roto World, which I'm thankful for. But, to the point where a glove first, glove only shortstop, it's more like the rarity now than the norm. It's become a premium offensive position with a ton of 5-category fantasy studs populating the ranks at shortstop. I'll get into a bunch of different names here in a bit, but focusing on Tatis Jr., exploded onto the scene last year, made the Padres opening day roster out of spring training at age 20, went on to bat .317 with a .969 OPS, 22 home runs, and 16 stolen bases over his first 84 major league games. Missed large chunks of time due to injuries, so was limited to 84 games. But they were freak things, and I'm not really worried yet about his durability becoming a long-term concern. And if you extrapolate those rookie year counting stats for Tatis out to a full 162 games, you get 42 homers, 31 stolen bases, 102 RBIs, and 118 runs scored, which is just insane for a shortstop. But I like where the Padres are headed as a team in general, too. That plays into it. Tatis should be surrounded by a ton of talent moving forward. But again, there's definitely some competition here at shortstop. Francisco Lindor could still be a very attractive option at age 31. You'd have to think he won't be stealing bases as much at this point, at that point in his career, like he is now. Wander Franco of the Rays, if you want to fall in love with a prospect, he's an easy one to fall in love with. Adalberto Mondesi with the Royals, I think, and he could be off the Royals at that point. I think he'll still be a candidate to lead the league in steals at what will be age 29 for him in 2025. Maybe some power eventually arrives. He had that great power pace in 2018, but showed last year that probably wasn't going to be a sustainable thing. Trey Turner, the speed, he hasn't really put it all together yet, but it just dripping with talent. Carlos Correa is still relatively young. It seems like he's been around forever, but he'll be 29 years old, I believe, in 2025. Trevor Story, if he's still at Coors Field and still playing shortstop. Gleyber Torres, Gavin Lux, a couple of young guys there as well. I think my second choice at shortstop would actually be Bo Bichette, who looked like a ready-made superstar as soon as he got the call from the Blue Jays last July. 311 batting average, 930 OPS, 11 home runs, 4 stolen bases over his first 46 major league games. And he's going to run a lot more in the future than he did as a rookie. I think an underrated aspect to drafting him, even in redraft leagues, but certainly in dynasty formats. Bichette had 15 steals in just 56 games last year at AAA Buffalo, 32 steals in 131 games at AA in 2018. I think Bichette can be a 30-homer, 30 stolen base kind of threat, maybe on an annual basis. So he'd be my number 2 pick after Fernando Tatis Jr. I probably left some names out. Javier Baez, Xander Bogaerts, they'll both be 32 years old or around there. Bobby Witt Jr., CJ Abrams, a couple of high first-round draft picks from last June. Crazy amount of talent at the shortstop position, and there's more coming. On to the outfield. I picked 3 names here for obvious reasons, I suppose. Generally, in fantasy baseball, you're starting between 3 and 5 outfielders at a time. It's a deep position, lots of options to choose from. First up, Ronald Acuna Jr. He was the number 1 overall pick in a lot of standard fantasy drafts this spring, and he's only 22 years old, so it stands to reason that he'll still be one of the very best all-around options on draft boards in 2025. Acuna last year nearly became just the 5th player in MLB history to tally 40-plus home runs and 40-plus stolen bases, finished with 41 homers and 37 steals. The 40-40 club for now, again, only 4 players so far. It's Jose Canseco, Barry Bonds, Alex Rodriguez, and Alfonso Soriano. I think Acuna will join that club at some point in the near future. Missed out on that chance probably this year. There won't be enough games for him to get there if we do get games at all, but it's something he can aim for in 2021, hopefully, and 2022. I mean, he's so young. He's got plenty of time to get there. Second in the outfield is second of 3 is Luis Robert. Hasn't played a game yet at the major league level, but he signed a pre-debut contract extension with the White Sox over the offseason and was probably going to be on their opening day roster in March and should be there for opening day 2.0 if we have an opening day 2.0. Robert batted .328 with a 1,001 OPS, 32 home runs, and 36 stolen bases in 122 games last year between high A, double A, and triple A affiliates with the White Sox. 22 years old, has all the tools to be a 5-category fantasy monster for a long, long time. And you look at that White Sox lineup, what it could be when baseball starts back up and in the years to come. It's deep and dynamic, and Robert should feast with his profile of power and speed. The more teammate-dependent counting stats like runs scored and RBIs, I think he'll get those, and he has the juice with the individual stats, batting average, homers, steals. I don't know that he's going to bat 328 in the majors, but high 200s, low 300s, I think he can get there. The third of my top three outfielders for 2025 is Juan Soto. Doesn't offer the base stealing ability of an Acuna or a Robert, but he feels like a really safe bet to me to be a perennial mainstay atop MLB's power leaderboards throughout the next decade. Matthew Poliat, who I had mentioned earlier, who I work with at Roto World, likened it to like he'll go on a Miguel Cabrera-like run for 10 years, and I'm buying that. I mean, debuted at age 19 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, in May 2018, and has put up a 937 OPS with 56 home runs and 180 RBIs through his first 266 Major League games. Celebrated his 21st birthday during the World Series last year, which Soto and the Nationals won, if you can recall real baseball things happening. Doesn't turn 22 years old until late October this year. I especially love the plate approach, given how young he is, just very mature, very smart hitter, has a 403 career on base percentage as a 21-year-old, through 266 games. It's not a small sample size. And I think that number might only improve as he develops further, both physically and mentally. Some of you have probably noticed that I did not include Mike Trout or Christian Yelich on this list. They were the other two guys being considered as the number one overall pick this spring, along with Acuna. But Trout and Yelich will be 33 years old, going on 34 in 2025. And you'd have to think that the speed won't be such a prominent element of their appeal as fantasy options, won't be as prominent an element of their skill set in general. It's still hard to leave those guys out. 33 is not that old. I would guess they'll still be very reliable four-category fantasy contributors. Some other names, Mookie Betts, Cody Bellinger, who I had as my top first baseman. Austin Meadows, I think, deserves a mention. Really arrived last year with power and some speed and a good batting average. Victor Robles, if he adds some power, remember he was a higher ranked prospect than Juan Soto at one point. But Soto didn't spend much time in the minor leagues to be able to land on those prospect rankings because, again, he debuted at age 19. Eloy Jimenez might be a sleeper here. Was a big-time prospect. Kind of struggled over his first month in the majors last year with the White Sox, but put in some really good stats down the stretch, and I think he'll be a big-time source of power on the south side of Chicago for a long time, especially in that lineup with Luis Robert. 5-tool prospects like Joe Adell of the Angels, Kyle Tucker of the Astros, who were kind of still waiting for him to get an opportunity. It's coming sooner rather than later. Jared Kelenic of the Mariners now, drafted by the Mets, traded in the Edwin Diaz deal. Dylan Carlson of the Cardinals, maybe. He's got the power and the speed and the batting average. I probably failed to mention some other obvious ones, but I feel good about those top three choices, all very young. Acuna and Soto being, already established to some degree. Robert as like the fast rising prospect with a profile that should make him a force in fantasy leagues if he's able to translate those minor league numbers to the majors, which, it's hard for some guys to actualize that sort of thing. So we'll have to wait and see. All right, let's go to starting pitcher. It feels like a crapshoot to try to project what pitchers will be the top aces 5 years from now. More of a crapshoot than doing so for position players because pitchers suffer serious injuries that require major surgeries. The elbow and even the shoulder is scarier now that surgeons have really nailed Tommy John surgery. But yeah, and they get worse sometimes. They simply get worse. And it all happens with greater frequency than hitters and position players. And also in fantasy, you're relying on somewhat outdated pitching stats, like with a lot of fluctuation and randomness, wins, even ERA and WHIP to some degree. Like those aren't really great measures of a pitcher's ability. But this is PitchCon, so we'll spend a little time with these guys. I'll just get all five on the board, and then we'll talk about them. Walker Buehler, Jack Flaherty. I didn't really order these, but maybe we can call this in order. Garrett Cole, Shane Bieber, Jesus Luzardo. A little chalky maybe in general with these picks. I could have certainly taken more chances on some guys who aren't really established yet. All five, Buehler, Flaherty, Cole, Bieber, and Luzardo, were among my top 20 or top 25 starting pitchers in fantasy leading into this season. Maybe not Luzardo so much, but he was close to that top 20, top 25. And he definitely gets a boost if this becomes a shortened season, because there shouldn't be any workload limit on Luzardo coming off that shoulder issue that cost him a lot of last season. So if we get going at some point here in 2020, Luzardo figures to be a hot commodity in drafts. 22-year-old, left-handed, absolutely filthy arsenal. Put up a 1.20 ERA with 20 strikeouts over his first 15 major league innings down the stretch last season. That includes his 3 shutout innings in the American League wildcard game. Buehler and Flaherty are more obvious. Like baseball's young, rising aces, ready to take that mantle as the game's top pitchers, from the Max Scherzers and Justin Verlanders and Jacob deGroms of the world, really knocking on the door. Scherzer and Verlander will presumably be retired 5 years from now. DeGrom could still be humming along. He'll be in his age 37 season, so he would be in my top 10 for this, but not quite the top 5. Garrett Cole will be 34 years old. It's a little bit more palatable of an age, but like we've seen with Scherzer and Verlander, some of these guys can get even better as they near age 40. I didn't feel all that confident going with Shane Bieber as one of my top 5, but he's young and has made such great strides from his days as a control specialist prospect in the minors. You combine that already honed elite command with a high strikeout rate, 259 strikeouts and 214 innings last year, and you've got the makings of a fantasy workhorse. Bieber's only 24 years old, so he'll be the age that Garrett Cole is now come 2025. I expect the ERA to at some point dip into the 2s. I think he has the profile to get there. I did name a top 2025 closer as well. We did this in the roundtables that were up at rotoworld.com in April. Asked everyone to just guess on a closer, but I thought it was kind of silly to include it in this presentation because, who really knows when it comes to relievers? They're so volatile, and to figure out which guy will be getting saves for a certain team is more futile than this whole experiment is. The top closer 5 years from now will probably be a failed starting pitcher or a failed starting pitching prospect. My choice, I'll admit, was Jordan Hicks, who was flashing some of the best raw stuff I've ever seen before the Cardinals lost him to Tommy John surgery last June. Hitting 103 miles an hour with regularity with his fastball and the movement on all of his other pitchers. And he was really just developing into a fully realized pitcher, not just a guy who blew batters away. He was keeping them off balance. The strikeouts weren't there yet, but you could tell they were coming. And he should be ready to take the mound sometime late this summer. And it would be lovely to have him, have some games for him to actually take the mound in. So hopefully that's where we're headed. Hopefully the owners and players can come together on the financials and safety aspects of this thing and work out a deal that works for both sides. It was a pleasure to be able to talk about some fantasy baseball in this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And hopefully some of my picks prove to be somewhat correct 5 years from now. I'll be happy if I landed a few. That's a lot of hopefullys, but that's my final message to you guys. And be safe, be healthy, be kind. And I want to thank the Pitcher List fellas for having me on again, and keep watching all these presentations, these roundtables, and donate to Feeding America and looking out for people who have it worse than we do. I'm happy to have not been a furloughed employee at this point, and hopefully we get some baseball to write about to justify my job at some point. Thanks so much.
Oh man, that was awesome, Drew. That was really cool to look forward to 2020 or 2025. And I think the one that surprised me the most, how could you possibly have Jack Flaherty there? How dare you? And not Mike Clevenger. I don't understand it. No, I totally get it. But
Clevenger's a good one.
We haven't really seen him put it together fully for a real legit 200 inning season or so.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think his ability sure speaks to being like a top 5 guy. But he's been injured a ton and he's been volatile. And I completely understand, like in 5 years or 4 years or whatever it is, 5 years, it's not going to be the same thing.
Yep.
But I think the one that really stuck out to me the most was Ozzie Albies, because I think a lot of those guys, I mean, like maybe Ketel Marte and Gleyber Torres and Altuve should still be relevant. On how much is the question, of course. But I would think people would focus more on that. And you brought up a really interesting stat about how much he's done as a 22-year-old and how relative it's different. Would you say that most, I mean, obviously those guys, it panned out well for being so young and coming up early. There was obviously kind of a sore thumb with Justin Upton. Not to say that he's been bad, but it's not the same level of like Griffey and Trout and so on. Do you kind of see Albies, I don't know, acting kind of like that? Because I don't think he really gets put in that kind of conversation. But this is really the first time I really took this moment to think, oh wait, maybe I am really actually underrating Albies.
Yeah, I mean, I think for what he's done, just from racking up 50 homers and 400 hits already through age 22, like the overall batting line is not elite yet. Like an 852 OPS is not the kind of guy you feel confident drafting first overall at a position. But I think he'll get there. I mean, the youth and the skill set, I think he keeps getting better year over year. And I don't think we've seen close to the best of him yet. I mean, what I would have loved to have seen what he could do at age 23 this year. It was weird for like a 2-month stretch. The Braves dropped him down in the lineup to like 6th.
Yeah. And
to see that lineup, like, really hum with Acuna, Albies, and Freddie Freeman as the top 3 guys in that Braves lineup, I think they would have done a lot of damage this year. I think the Braves would have been excellent, and maybe they still will be.
Yeah. Bruce Cayley Jr. Brings up an interesting point because Albies also, I think, played in 162 games or very close to it in each of the last 2 seasons. And so that might be affecting that number, but nevertheless, I mean, I think something we don't really consider a lot with these young guys too is the strength that they gain while being in the majors. I mean, if you look at some like Justin Upton, for example, I remember when he was kind of thin and then he really put into weight training and became an absolute monster. And that's something that I kind of in my head, I was like, oh yeah, this is who he is now. And we often, I mean, I'm very guilty to this of not realizing, right, prospect growth is not linear. They still have a lot of development time to go. And even if it's like until he's 25 or 26 to get there, there's still a lot of time for Albies to improve. So we have some questions here. Glass Cobra has one. I would love to hear some deeper dart throw picks. Drew, would you pinpoint at any position or starting pitcher who are D picks that are potential breakouts that would put them as a top 20-25 performer?
Man, there are a ton at starting pitcher, especially like you could, and this is PitchCon. Let's do it. Chris Paddock,
sure.
He's a guy that like he almost feels safe. Like he's going to have the ERA and he's probably going to be a strikeout pruning kind of guy. Pitching on a pretty good Padres team, like they look like they're going to be good into the future and a good home ballpark. Mackenzie Gore too. Like
no, sorry. It's a joke, but yeah.
I don't get all your pitcher list inside jokes, Nick.
Sorry.
Maybe I should be consuming more content. Maybe I'm
the one person that hates Mackenzie Gore for whatever reason.
Wow, so, why is that?
I mean, I've seen very little footage of him. I mean, I hear all this stuff. Like apparently he has plus command and like 4+ pitches and stuff. I guess I haven't fully seen it yet, and I feel like his mechanics don't really speak to. It's like something that's very consistent all the time. It's very, I don't know, violent.
It is like kind of herky-jerky a little bit.
Right.
But Chris Sale pitches like that too, though.
This is true, right? There are always exceptions to the rule. And from all the reports that he has plus command, then okay, maybe I'm wrong. I like DL Hall more when I saw them both in the Futures game, which is hilarious. But
Nate Pearson along this line.
Nate Pearson, great, yeah. Definitely.
Definitely has this. Mike Soroka probably doesn't get enough love.
Sure, yeah.
Talk about players who aren't like fully formed.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, he's just got to add a little bit of strikeout rate to his game, and I think there's no doubt he can do it. Shohei Ohtani was one that when we were doing the roundtables for like, I don't know, you could see like some kind of lane where he winds up just being a pitcher, even though he has done very well as a hitter up to this point. When he first came around, that was what people thought might happen, is he's going to drop the hitting at some point. Not going to be a two-way guy. And I mean, I can't wait to see him back on the mound too, man. Talking about all these guys makes me want to cry.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, it's good to do it again. It's one of those things. Like the last month, we've, at least for me, I've kind of fallen out of it, and I realize, it's just so much fun to do this again. But yeah, Ohtani, I think Ohtani doesn't get enough credit for that fastball. He was apparently tipping his pitches, in 2018. And I mean, that's why you have like a -5 p-val or whatever on a fastball when you throw like 98 and you only have like 12 starts or 50 innings. But his slider is unbelievably good. His splitter is unbelievably good. And he has a curveball he can also throw for strikes. Like, yeah, I can't wait to watch more Ohtani. I mean, that he hits for 3 days a week. Like, it's a really good hitter. Oh man. So I'm definitely stoked about that one. All right, we have a couple more questions. Bojang asks, odds of a real Dylan Carlson breakout at the big league level in his rookie year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the opportunity was there for him. Like, the Cardinals finished 21st in combined team OPS last year and let Marcell Ozuna essentially walk. Left field wide open for Dylan Carlson to slide in. I think there was a chance that he would have made the opening day roster. And the Cardinals in their history haven't really kept players in the minors to like stunt their service time. I couldn't find a single case of them doing that. And sometimes that's circumstantial. Like maybe you just don't have a position player prospect who's like that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. He's like a fast rising guy for me. I am a Cardinals fan, so I'm like very much rooting for him to become a 5 category fantasy stud, which would make him just a great all around baseball player. I don't know. You look at the numbers, like I haven't really seen him play that much. I'm not a prospects evaluator, but the numbers are there. He's got a little bit of power. He's got a little bit of speed. And he was playing very well this spring in Grapefruit League play. I think it's really possible that he's going to be there in their starting lineup on opening day 2.0, and they're kind of relying on him, or at least they were. And maybe the service time thing won't even really be an issue.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I could see it happening for sure. I think the opportunity's there. I think he's in a good situation to do it. And I think he has the skills to do it.
Definitely. Of the guys that you mentioned, so you have like Cody Bellinger, of course, at first base. You have Fernando Tatis at shortstop, Rafael Devers, kind of that infield with Ozzie Albies. Who do you think is the one of those that, I know that I hate speaking negative ever, but who would you say of those guys are the ones that are the most volatile in range of, like, they could obviously be that top performer in 2025, but they also have this really low floor that might disappoint people?
Man, I almost hate to say Bellinger, but because he doesn't really offer high level speed, and maybe he's not going to be like a high 300 hitter, because he does, like I talked about in the presentation, he does have that kind of undercut swing, which is actually probably the correct way to swing.
Right.
But I could see a lot of swing and miss in his game. I think he's going to be an elite power option, but maybe if he does settle in at first base, he's not going to have the power of a Pete Alonso long term.
Sure.
So it's weird to say, that could be like a bust, but I could see that. I could see him maybe not being like a perennial top 5 pick because he doesn't necessarily have that speed. And especially if you're looking 5 years ahead to age 29, maybe he won't be stealing 10 plus bases a year.
So there's also Wander Franco, of course. That everyone is just like, oh my God, Wander Franco. Is there another outfielder out there that is someone that's like, hey, he's really young, and 5 years from now, he may be 17 or 18 now, but then he becomes 22, 23 that you have your eye on right now?
I think Joe Adell, who hasn't really like put up huge numbers yet, but there's like little inklings that he can be this 5-tool stud.
Right. Yeah.
Austin Meadows, who I talked about too, he's not a young guy. He's not like a prospect, but I think he had a sneaky great year last year. Not sneaky to anyone who really follows baseball closely, but like a 922 OPS, 33 homers, and then 12 stolen bases. He could be like a 40 homer threat with like 20 steals. Julio Rodriguez. I mentioned Jared Kelenic, but Julio Rodriguez, people love his bat in the Mariners system. Could see him starting to make some waves here soon too. I don't know. I mean, I'm not like a huge prospects expert. That's why we have Christopher Crawford on the staff to handle that and to make puns on Twitter.
Nice. Yeah. Is there, I know this is completely separate really from all this, but is there a certain player that you're just kind of pining for the most of all this? Like as you're doing this, you're like, oh yeah, I'm so happy that this guy is here because I just love him irrationally so much.
Man, Luis Robert, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, just you look at the numbers last year in the minors, 328 batting average, OPS over 1,000, 32 homers, 36 stolen bases, and only 122 games. And as he went up the levels, like he was fine. It took him a little bit of time to adjust, but then he got there. And that's kind of what you want to see in a prospect, like adjusting to new environments, new leagues, new pitchers. And maybe he's one of those prospects where he was a stud in the minors and it just won't happen in the majors. He's got some swing and miss to his game. But I don't know, as a Cardinals fan, they finished second to him when he came out of Cuba and the White Sox won that. And so I've always really regretted that. It would be nice to have Luis Robert and Dylan Carlson in the system ready to go.
Wait, I couldn't tell that you're a St. Louis fan. I've got no indication behind you that you would be in the slightest.
I saw some guys wearing jerseys in their presentations earlier, and I was going to throw on my David Freese 2011 World Series patch.
Oh, that would have been great. You should have done that. That would have been awesome.
But I have like a Roto World shirt.
I mean, that's legit. That's legit. But by the way, about Luis Robert, okay, so again, I am not a prospect guy, let alone a hitter guy. I love focusing on starting pitchers. I did notice that Luis Robert has like a 20% plus swing strike rate in the minors. It's I don't know how much to put stock into that. I feel as if he's just a happy hacker. Like he's someone who's just going aggressively in every single at bat, which then is kind of not how to, in the majors, sure, that might work like for the first month or so. And the guy's like, okay, fine, we're just going to throw him all this filth. And he's going to be much more out of place. Yeah. Do you have any concern with that?
Yeah.
Or do you that's just something he'll just get over and be fine with?
I mean, I wouldn't rule him out like developing a better plate approach. And I think the skills are there for if and when he does that, for him to be an awesome fantasy asset, awesome real life player. And then you look at the White Sox lineup, like Tim Anderson, who's probably not going to win another batting title, but is a pretty good player. Moncada, Jose Abreu, Yasmani Grandal in there for the long term.
Right, yeah.
Edwin Encarnacion, we probably won't be there in 5 years, but Eloy Jimenez, maybe Nomar Mazara becomes something.
Sure.
Luis, this is my girlfriend, by the way, Christine. She's an essential worker. She works in oral surgery, and she's been going to work the whole time. So,
fantastic! Thank you.
Wrap it up for her.
Thank you.
She just got home from work.
So I mean, good point you made there. Also, you brought up Edwin Encarnacion, even though he won't be there now. He's the kind of player you want there, just to have that veteran presence and kind of introduce him to the league. It's so important. I mean, I don't think we really talk about that enough.
Well, in fantasy, there's like teammate dependent counting stats. Like we're working on some. There's silly stats in standard 5x5 scoring, like RBIs and runs scored are not a measure of a player's ability. We all know that. Neither is batting average really, but I don't see like the standard scoring really changing. So you have to think about that. Is this guy going to be surrounded by people that can drive him in, by people that he can drive in? Where is he going to be in that lineup? And I think with Robert, he's probably going to start off batting like 8th for the White Sox, but I think he could move up.
Yeah, definitely. So we have one more question here from Pullhitter43. He asks, how much goes into forecasting 2025 with player evaluation versus their team situation?
Yeah, I mean, I almost like just threw out the team situation.
Sure.
Because trades, free agency, you're talking 5 years in the future. Most of those guys that I mentioned will have sniffed free agency at that point, or have signed, a long-term extension, or have been trade bait. So I kind of just threw that out the window. It's in the back of your mind like for a guy like Gleyber Torres, who if he's still with the Yankees, maybe he would be my top second baseman, or maybe he's going to be at shortstop, but yeah, so it's really just about, looking at their numbers to date, their age, looking into the analytics somewhat. Have they made improvements? Are there improvements for them to make?
Right.
And going off that, because you just can't predict what ballpark they'll be hitting in and what uniform they'll be wearing and who their teammates will be. You can hope, but it's hard to project that far.
I mean, we can't even predict like an hour before the end of the trade deadline what's going to happen.
Right. Yeah.
How are we going to do in 5 years in the future how team construction is going to work? So I completely understand that. But anyway, so really, Drew, thanks so much. This was an awesome presentation. Really, really cool to look into 5 years in the future and just get a sense, especially for dynasty leagues. Like, all right, this is kind of how things might shape up.
Yeah.
It's nice to look into the glass ball, because oftentimes, I mean, I'm very guilty of this. I look 3 years or so at most, and I don't really think the full 5 years or so. And it's cool to see that Jack Flaherty may actually work out in the end. Who knows? Maybe he's not just a second half.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me, man. This was really cool, and I love what you guys do at Pitcherless, and this is such a great idea, and to be able to pull it off and get all these baseball writers on board. I only had like one issue at the beginning. That's pretty good.
It blew my mind completely that there are so many people in this community that are that generous and just instantly like, oh yeah, this sounds great, I'm in.
Well, so it helps that you're a good person, Nick.
It's very nice of you to say that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we're going to continue now with Andy Patton, Trevor Hoots. They have a conversation with Tariq Skubal, Daniel Lynch, and Alex Fado. So we're looking forward to that. That's going to be at 6:00. So everybody tune back in for that. In the meantime, I'm going to do some rally up stuff. But anyway, thank you so much, Drew. Thanks for coming through.
No problem, man. Anytime.